Thank you, everyone. We're going to probably have some folks trickling in because there's some exciting panels that are happening this morning, some incredible speakers at the conference. And so I just want to welcome all of you. If you are here because you are excited to talk about how diverse voices need to be present in the e-mobility program planning and also at all leadership levels throughout the e-mobility industry, then you are at the right place. This is the Diversifying E-Mobility Experts panel, and we have an incredible group of people with us today. Let me introduce myself. My name is Jessica Buendia, and friends call me Jessie. And I am here as a part of Dream Corps Green for All, which is a program that was founded in 2007 by Van Jones to build an inclusive green economy that is strong enough to lift people out of poverty. We work specifically to advocate for policies and programs that ensure that a clean economy will bring good jobs, better health, and real wealth to low-income communities and underserved communities. And so I'm very excited to be here at this panel. And again, welcoming the folks that are trickling in. We have some incredible experts across the e-mobility industry with us today. Reggie Humphrey, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Partnerships at General Motors, coming to us from Detroit. So if you could do a little, all right, there he is. We have Danielle Cherry Hoover from Evie Noir, who is the project manager at Evie Noir, whose mission is to both educate and connect diverse owners and operators of hybrids and electrical vehicles. And she's coming to us from Atlanta. And so if you wave your, all right. And then we have Darnell Johnson, who is the CEO and president of Urban Efficiency Group, a utility implementation contractor and community sustainability design firm, coming to us from Chicago. And so I definitely want to give each of you an opportunity to be able to share your story and tell us how you got into the EV mobility industry and why you're passionate about the work that you do. And I'm going to start with Reggie. So handing it over to you, Reggie.
Thank you, Jesse. So I'm just privileged to be here. Been with General Motors for 26 years in a myriad of roles from manufacturing to order fulfillment, purchasing, supply chain logistics, and now leading DEI partnerships within our HR organization. And I'm just excited because as GM has fully committed to making this world a better place and committed to being an all-electric automotive mobility solutions company, by 2035, with our entire platforms being converted to all-electric vehicles, it's exciting. Today, President of the United States is actually at Factory Zero here in Detroit to see, right, what we're doing. I think it's very special. It's a bold commitment by our CEO and chair, Mary Barra, and our leadership team to make sure that we have a better world of zero crashes, zero congestion, and zero emissions. And I'm just excited to be a part of this, to be partners with Evie Noir through our Justice and Inclusion Fund is a huge win for us because what ultimately, we want to become the most inclusive company in the world. And a part of that is ensuring that our Black and brown communities don't get left behind in an all-electric future. And that's everything from workforce to our consumers. And it's obviously making sure that the technologies that we bring to our consumers are actually coming from a diverse supply base. So there's a lot of connecting points here about going to an all-electric future. And we're just excited to be not only a part of this day, but a part of a future that's going to make the world better. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Reggie. And Danielle.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you to all of you who not only attended the conference, but are within the panel. So my name is Danielle Cherry Hoover, again with Evie Noir, and I identify as she, her, hers. And for those maybe ADA client, I have a black dress on and wearing glasses today. So again, welcome. I got into the EV space and of course with Evie Noir for a couple of reasons. I definitely believe in the mission and vision of Evie Noir, biasly so. However, sometimes you have to build a table to have a seat at a table, and identifying and understanding the benefits of an electric life or an EV-friendly life and the detriment to those families, especially Black and brown communities, of basically the standard course. So my mission, my personal mission in life is to live a life, to leave a legacy. And what that means, just clean air and a future for our children's children. And with that becomes a myriad of benefits, socioeconomical benefits, health benefits, bridging that gap with the disparities, and transportation and human rights and civil rights walk a very tight parallel. And a lot of those things that we're doing within Evie Noir, I'm very proud of, even if it's just as simple as having a conversation and doing things like we do today. So I'm very happy to be a part of the panel.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Darnell?
Thanks, Jesse, and to my fellow panelists, to all of you guys. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here. My name is Darnell Johnson. I'm with Urban Efficiency Group. I'm the president, and we are a community sustainability design firm that focuses primarily within disinvested communities on designing end-to-end strategies around sustainability and making sure that we are educating and bringing an awareness to sustainability, that folks begin to see sustainability as a system and not as silos. And so within that systemic, approach to sustainability, there is an aspect called resource regeneration, which is where our interests around EV, renewable energy, all of those different interests lie. And it's really important when we begin to talk about sustainability, especially as we begin to look at the existential threats that are facing our urban core. When you begin to factor in poverty, when you begin to factor in a lot of the issues that are contributing to the high rate of death and homicides, when you begin to factor all these things in and layer in the environmental threats to that, if we don't begin to pivot and do some things differently, we're concerned about the future sustainability of the urban core and even some threats of variations of urban extinction. And so as we begin to look at those things and really figure out how do we make sure that we're keeping those things on pace or ahead of pace, EV is a huge conversation, not only because of the economic opportunities, but just from the outdoor and indoor air quality issues. When we begin to look at, how this adversely impacts, the overall health, especially in densely populated communities that traditionally represent people of color. We are disproportionately represented, which contributes to the higher rate of asthma and other respiratory problems within our communities. And so I got into this space because of sustainability, but more specifically because of the opportunities, both economic as well as social determinants of health that directly impact our community. So I'm excited to be on the panel. I look forward to learning from my colleagues and being able to share with those that are present. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And for those of you who are just joining us, coming from the morning panels, or depending on where you are in the country, you are in the e-mobility, Diversifying e-mobility experts panel. And so I'm welcoming you here. The focus of the panel is really about how we are ensuring that diverse perspectives are at the center of all levels of conversation within e-mobility. And we have an esteemed panel ahead of us who are going to answer some pre-prepared questions. But I want to really encourage all of you who are participating in the conference to please leave your questions in the Q&A section of the website that you see in front of you. And so if you look to your right of the screen, you'll see the chats, which we encourage, and we love the love that you're sending us. So thank you so much through the chats. There's polls, people, and then there's Q&A. Please feel free to leave us questions as they come up, and you also have an opportunity to vote on questions that you want to see prioritized. All right, so thank you very much. I am going to throw you guys all the first question. And ladies, sorry, I'm working on my gender. What are current structural barriers that present diversity in the e-mobility industry at all levels of decision-making? Are there organizations and companies that you see excelling in this space?
I'll start with that if it's okay. I think that one of the things, and when we start talking, I'm really big on addressing barriers, and when we begin to look at barriers, both from a corporate level and the community level and everything in between. I think that number one, we have to understand that when we're talking about emerging technologies such as electric vehicles, electric vehicle charging, number one of the barriers is awareness, and the way that awareness, that message is being given to communities that have been disinvested. I think that we have done a great job of marketing to folks that are already interested in these types of technologies, but I believe that we have to do a better job and a more intentional job of communicating that message to individuals from disinvested communities. Secondly, I think it's access. Even if folks are made aware of these things, do they have accessibility to the workshops? Do they have accessibility to conferences? Do they have accessibility to being able to actually drive, touch, feel an electric vehicle? So awareness, access, and the last thing is affordability. All of these things can be present, but if it's not driven by affordability, making things more affordable for all populations of folks, you're going to begin to see this misalignment and this inequity that exists within the space. And I think that we have to be very intentional in sharing with our corporate partners and community partners alike on what are the best ways to engage communities. And that becomes, I don't want to, do a drive-by on that statement, because many times at the corporate levels, our systems and our corporate levels they have some of the most brilliant and brightest minds, but yet they may not necessarily be as well versed in engaging communities of color and disinvested communities in a way that is not offensive and that is not projecting on them. And I think that there's a lot to be said on how we engage these communities to make these communities feel wanted, to make them feel inclusive, and to make them feel that they don't have to be demoralized or be dehumanized in the process. One of the things that our firm is really big on is procedural justice. And so how do we make sure that we are achieving these goals is by looking through the lens and applying the lens of procedural justice, which says everyone that will be impacted by the decisions that are being made should be brought to the table, included in the conversation, and their voices influence and inform the decisions that are made prior to allocations and decisions being made. And oftentimes, more times than I would like to give acknowledgments to, we see that happening in reverse. All of the decisions have been made, all of the resources have been allocated, and then we want to go and tell these communities what we have for them. And that is very offensive, and it's very much projecting. And I don't think that that's always necessarily the intention, but getting the folks in the room that understand, that can act as corridors and connectors to these communities that already have established credibility in these communities are the folks that should be at the table, helping to guide and navigate these discussions so that we don't keep making these same critical missteps as we try to engage communities and get information out.
Thank you, Darnell. And to the extent that co-sign everything you said, and also, would love to hear, are there organizations and companies that you know of or that might be on the panel today that are excelling in this area?
I can chime in there, Jessica, and I absolutely echo Darnell, a lot of your sentiments. Why not ask the communities whom you are serving the questions that are needed? If there is not a mirror lens, how can you identify or even communicate with someone effectively? So again, I work with and for Evie Noir. There's an organization, our 501c3, Evie Hybrid Noir. It's made up of Evie enthusiasts. So what's the best word of mouth in many communities the best form of communication in many communities is word of mouth. So if I see someone who looks like me, or from someone we talked to earlier, we were chit-chatting from the Midwest, I'm going to lean into what I see and know. And if there is no mirror within the industry, it is hard to lean on and many times understand who's communicating to you or speaking at you. And so a lot of that happens with a conversation, and optics absolutely matter. Side note, prior to me working in the transportation space, I worked in professional baseball. So I worked for a team, Major League Baseball team, one of one in many of a room. And when it was time for DEI conversations, then you want to ask a question. I do not represent all Black women with curly hair and glasses today. I speak for me. And optics absolutely matter. There are some folks in this space, and again, I'm very proud of everyone who has joined the panel, biasly so, GM, even Uber. And a lot of people may think, why are they joining? If there's work to be done, why not hold someone's feet to the fire who's willing to stand on the line and willing to make change and have those conversations? There are a ton of organizations, FAHE is one of them as well, they're on a panel, I believe later this afternoon, if memory serves, or tomorrow, I do apologize, but FAHE and Mr. King, who is head over that organization on the local level within the Western Plains states, working with tribal lands. That is a huge and widely important. Those who are on the front line need to be in the front of the line. Those who want, those who can advocate should advocate. So there are a ton of partners that we've had, even on the utility side, who are doing a great job of even saying, hey, we don't have it. So who can we go to ask the question? Partnering with companies such as Dominion, PepCo, BGE, they at least internally say we may need to talk to people. And then asking the follow-up question, hey, here's our social media post. Well, if you're talking to a Black and brown community, why isn't there a Black and brown person in the photo? How can someone relate if the optics don't work? So there are a ton of folks who are on the panel, and I encourage all of you who are listening and out there, take a look and look up who the speakers are, and look up where they're doing. But there are a ton who are on the regional level, such as obviously partnering with Forth, a GM, Toyota, Changing Optics, FAHE on the local level, Evie Go, charging infrastructure stations. So please, I encourage everyone, take a look at the panelists and do your own due diligence.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Yeah, and it seems like we have a lot of implementers who are here today who really are trying to come out of this panel today, but also the conference as a whole, with tangible strategies that they can take home and best practices. And so I'm wondering, are there any other strategies besides the ones that have been mentioned so far that people have deployed, especially in areas where an inequity has already happened and we're trying to reverse it?
So let me tap into this from one lens, right? Because I think both of my fellow panelists spoke to a lot of great points. Let me be very specific in our workforce, right? So for General Motors, it's going to be important that as we transform into this all-electric future, how do we look at our workforce to ensure that they, right, are prepared and have livable wages and are a part of this economy? And that goes everything from how we select the right talent, right? I mean, traditionally, we've changed the way we're looking. We have an entire team as a part of our DEI organization underneath our Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer, Telva Magruder, where we have 3 work streams. I own partnerships. We have another organization that owns what we call DEI, business intelligence and ERG growth, which is our employee resource groups, to make sure they have a voice into the process. But we also have a very robust workforce strategy that we're building up. And that team is being exponentially grown, because we have 3 pillars to it. There's how do we consult and integrate within our company? How do we make sure that we've designed pathways into the company that are non-traditional? And then also, how do we innovate within the company? So let me just speak to one example, right? So we joined a coalition under 110 to make sure that 1 million Black people get an opportunity to work, right, within our community over the next 10 years. And a big part of that is changing the mindsets on what schools are you recruiting from? Not just the popular schools, but the schools. I'm a product of Alabama A&M, a historically Black college. We don't typically dive into those pipelines of talent because we're so enamored with what's comfortable for us, right? Another piece is, are we looking at GPA requirements? Why is it that a certain GPA has always shifted us out of the equation? So we've got a very robust workforce strategy team that is building out specific strategies to make sure that we're knocking down some of those barriers that Darnell talked about and what Danielle has referenced as well, because a big part of this discussion is giving me access to an opportunity to prove that I can contribute in a very meaningful way, but that I can always walk away from this process knowing that I contributed towards a better future. Every day I have a livable wage. And I'm just proud that GM is on a journey of opening our eyes. And let's be real about this. This is going to take time. There's a lot of resistance to traditional techniques and pathways that we have to break through. And that's why I'm excited to be a part of that journey, because I think we're going to see a real difference over the next few years specifically of how we not only, we have one of our leaders that says there's a war for talent and talent won. Well, then we have to think differently about how to get the right diverse talent in our companies so they can make a real difference.
Yeah, I think that
Reggie. Oh, go ahead, Darnell.
No, I was going to say, Jesse, like Reggie hit on a couple of things that just really got a couple of things spinning for me. And I really like the fact that we're making this more of a conversation than it is a panel, because one of the things that Reggie said that I 100% agree with. And let's talk about workforce for a second. One of the things that we really need to focus in on, and our firm is doing a lot of work around this. We are working with over 15 municipalities within the Cook County or the greater Chicagoland area. And the reason why when these municipalities are typically disinvested communities led by political leaders of color. But one of the things that we're doing is we're wanting to make sure that first and foremost, municipal leadership understands what the benefits, the burdens, and the responsibilities are that falls to them so that they can begin to prepare. Because let's face it, there's a lot of things that falls at the feet of the municipal leaders to prepare their cities for an electric future, right? In order to get EV charging more robust, then that means there has to be infrastructure. In order to have infrastructure, there has to be a permitting process that has to be updated in, codes and those types of things. And so these are things that we're starting to have conversations with at the level of the municipal leadership. But let's see how that trickles down to and it begins to affect workforce. As we talk about workforce, and to Reggie's point, being able to find diverse talent and talent that is not the usual suspects means that we're going to have to start looking in places that are unusual, right? And one of the ways that we can assist in that feat is by creating, one of the things that I've always said, if it doesn't exist, you have to build it. And so what we're doing is we have an initiative called the Green Generation. Green Generation is an intergenerational sustainability, workforce, and advocacy initiative for high school students starting in their freshman year and they go through their senior year. And we're teaching and exposing them to emerging technologies, one of which is the EV charging. One of the things that we are struggling with in Black and Brown communities with EV adoption is the lack of infrastructure. We don't have enough charging stations within Black and Brown communities that would make one comfortable enough to go out and invest money in buying an electric vehicle when they have to drive 45 minutes to an hour to charge it. And so one of the things that we're doing with these students is something called Blue Map. And the students were working with EV charging partners to get a spec sheet we developed a spec sheet that says these are the things that a charging partner will look for in choosing a future site. We're then training our students to do that work and go out and become, it's called an intercommunal infrastructure initiative, where we are now taking that responsibility on ourselves to identify sites that fall within the spec, uploading them to a digital platform, which is called Blue Map, and making that map available in real time to EV charging partners. That's doing a number of things. Number one is training our students with a transferable skill set, preparing them for something that is emerging in the future. Number two, it becomes a youth workforce development opportunity because we pay these students for their time to go out and do this work. And number three, it promotes more equity because we are looking at now providing charging companies or EV charging companies with information that says, we are doing the heavy lifting for you and identifying these sites. So now we can ask the question, why are there not more investments in our communities to make these charging stations available? So this whole Blue Map effect is kind of what we look at as the 3 E's, is equity, economics, and education. And it's all for building up this next generation of thought leaders to be ready to step into this emerging future of electrification.
Darnell, it's amazing. I feel like Well, I was just going to say, to pull it together, we have a question that's coming in from a panelist, but it's also connected to one of the questions that we were going to dig into. And thank you, Reggie and Darnell, for bringing this forward. But what is the role of institutions of higher education and career development programs in ensuring that companies and organizations in the e-mobility space actually have the talent pools of interested young career professionals to pull from? And we just heard an amazing example. And I don't know, Reggie, if you've also been able to work in that space, but would love to hear from Danielle too.
Thank you, Reggie. I just want to piggyback off of the wonderful opportunity of getting education and getting in front of young people. So when various scopes and projects that I'm currently a part of and have been a part of is starting at that K through 12. And partnerships with HBCUs. So what that escalator effect, if you understand that marketing term. So in all things, those formative years. So working with National Summer Transportation Institutes that are plugged into various schools. For example, we just did a partnership with, I went to 2 different schools. I went to a HBCU and I went to a PWI. For those who might not understand those terms, I'm an alumnus of Morgan State, historically Black college and university. I'm also went to school at Villanova, what they call a PWI, a predominantly white institution. So both ends of the spectrum, pros and cons to each. But the main focal point is the opportunity. What I can say, what was at one school definitely wasn't at the other, but what was at one school absolutely was not at the other. And working with National Summer Transportation Institutes, they had children at Morgan State this past summer as early as 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So we're talking about some of the things that you just mentioned, Darnell. Can an EV be my first car? Absolutely. You can have your summer job at McDonald's and get a Bolt and go back and forth and save money. There are the benefits, health benefits. Well, my little brother has asthma. Guess what? You can help with that by living and introducing this these opportunities of electrification to your friends. Another thing is they take these programs and back to their schools. So where funding may not be, how can we ingest that information and where can we go? It's hitting people exactly where they are. So having a wonderful conference in the middle of downtown that no one can get to because of socioeconomical and lack of transportation, that does no one any good. Starting these children as young and making it fun and interactive. So we also at a different level have within Evie Noir and Evie Hybrid Noir, what they call Drive the Future series, not only at HBCUs, but even the workplace. So there are plenty of people going back and forth that have that same level of EV education from zero to expert, myself included. There are always new things to learn and to talk about. And that's why I love the level of conversation. So starting people when they're young and then bridging those gaps with other resources. For example, having things at the schools, partnering with HBCUs and having Drive the Future, making it fun and interactive, having a DJ there, having people who they can relate to, such as for example, a Pharrell who's very ingrained in electrification and EV space, but also makes amazing music. So having a DJ, cars, Ask an EV Owner events. Those are a lot of things that we've done with an Evie Noir that not only are fun and innovative, but are opportunities for data collection, talking and getting information, doing landscape analysis, all wrapped up into something that's fun where people can, this is of course pre-pandemic, touch, feel, see, ask an owner who looks like me about their cool car, from Teslas to Bolts, and the various economic ranges of educating someone about a vehicle. So it does start, to me, if the opportunity can start as early as possible for early EV adopters, even if it's just having that level of education and planting those seeds.
And I guess let me just kind of close this one out with kind of where my head is at. So but prior to this role, I had the privilege of leading supplier diversity. And a big part of this journey of e-mobility is where will our, going back to even what Darnell talked about and coupling that with Danielle, I want to see this next generation, these kids who are learning STEM. I want them to think about not just trying to get a job, but creating jobs. I want to see this next generation understand that whether it's infrastructure from from the charging stations to the parts, the services, the maintenance, the installation, our dealerships, our engineering capabilities that we're going to need for parts and components and subsystems that make up these battery, and for us, the Ultify platform. There's so many opportunities and so many different work streams that we have to prepare our young folks for, that I'm just really excited, because it's an opportunity that typically, again, I go back to what Darnell said earlier, if you are not aware of it, if you don't understand what the roadmap, the technology roadmap looks like, then you don't know where you can fit in and participate. And I'm just a big believer that if we grab these kids at a young age, like I did as a part of our Women's Business Enterprise National Council a couple years ago, we came to Baltimore to do the conference, and we went to the Boys and Girls Club, and one of our partners, Planet Mogul, what she does is she takes interactive tools and teaches grade age kids about different industries. And part of mine was to teach them about the automotive industry, from design to build to selling vehicles. And the amazing part was listening to little kids talk about a car, right, and what it could do in the future, from EV to changing colors to actually flying, right? Their imaginations are wide open. So if we can try to funnel some of that imagination into the practical applications that are going to be our future, and show them that you can not only be an employee, but you can be an owner of a business and actually participate at a higher level. That's how we're going to bridge the wealth gaps in this country, is by entrepreneurship and by making sure that we've put these kids in a position to understand that if you can see it, you can be it. And there's just so many opportunities, so many ways for us to take advantage of these bright talents and minds, especially in our urban communities.
You know, if we were together, you'd hear the snapping. Thank you, Reggie. Absolutely. I mean, the passion absolutely shows, you know, and I think your deep commitment to the next generation, both from a climate perspective, but also around wealth creation, and how important those two coming together is critically part of the solution. I'm going to turn a little bit, though, and ask you a little bit more personally about your experience as a person who's talented, diverse within this industry, trying to make enormous amount of both institutional change, but also cultural change. What are the different barriers that you are facing? And I'd encourage you, I know it's a public panel, but, you know, for folks who are doing this work, maybe in an isolated way in their own industries, you know, if you could be vulnerable and share, I think that would be amazing. And so pass it out back to the panel.
Sure, I'll go with this one. At least get started. Well, first and foremost, I think that it's really important that, you know, as a person of color and that brings a diverse thought to any room. Typically, I'm one of the only folks in the room that looks like me whenever these conversations are happening. So there's an extreme amount of confidence that one must possess individually about their knowledge of a certain system or space, but more importantly about the knowledge that they have about the people that they represent. And so when we began to express the feelings and the sentiments that are reflective more broadly throughout the fabrics of disinvested communities, the first barrier is that there is a more times than not, there is a very obvious disinterest in having diversity of thought if it requires there to be a pivot from what they know to be their comfort zone. And so when I'm speaking on different subjects, you know, we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as if they are synonyms, but they're not synonyms, right? You know, you can be diverse and not be equitable. You can be inclusive and not be equitable, but you cannot be equitable and not be diverse and inclusive, right? And so many times what I see is that we have corporations that want to be diverse in a posturing mode only. We want people in the room that look differently, but we don't want to include the thoughts and the experiences that they bring along from that diverse background in our planning, right? And that's a huge disconnect. That's what I call corporate posturing. You're posturing to give the appearance that you're really about diversity, but when you begin to really peel back the layers of what it means to be diverse, they began to discover that the lift is much heavier than what they initially wanted to make an investment in, right? And so ultimately, as you began to continue to empower, inform, and to take a position, it's very easy for my passion to then, point number two, to then be misinterpreted as me being aggressive or me being an angry black man, right? But everyone else in the room can be passionate, and they're just passionate. But when I become equally as passionate, I'm angry. And so there's even among the professionals and the practitioners in the space, we have to constantly, remind and have to constantly hold firm the line that, hey, I'm not in this room because I'm a token. I'm in this room because I have something valuable to offer, and I have a community of folks that need to be represented in some shape, form, or fashion, to make sure that they're not left behind. So I think that there's a lot to, and I'm going to then, digress so that my my colleagues on the panel can speak. But I think that the first thing that I see as a huge barrier in my experience is that there must be an internal look within corporations at what they're doing, their policies and their practices, and really come to grips with how committed are they to pivoting and turning the corner on equity and diversity and inclusion. That starts with looking at one's own self. Systems don't run themselves. People run systems. So if I don't look at myself and begin to identify my own implicit biases and my own disconnections and my areas of inequity, there's no way that I can flag it when I'm sitting in a boardroom among my peers to say that's inequitable, right? It begins with one's own self. Then it begins with the system, and then you can begin to affect the society and the communities that we're targeted to serve. So I digress.
No, Darnell, I mean, let me just piggyback right there, right? So, because I want to take this on, because this is, again, it's a patient process and the resistance is real. I mean, let's be very candid about this. We often talk about the fact that when you talk about DEI, right, that's in my title and all that good stuff, you lead with inclusion. Diversity will stick, right? By definition, inclusion is our behaviors, right? It became one of our GM behaviors, one of 8, right? Along with winning with integrity and looking ahead and being bold. But let's start with our behaviors, right? That's the inclusion. By definition, equity is a fair and impartial process. So let's check ourselves, right? On how, now we know how we act. Now let's look at what the processes dictate we do. If you do those two things right, the data, which is diversity, will come along for the ride, right? And so when people think about the words DEI, we often, we got it mixed up. It just sounded better to flow with DEI. It should start with I, right? Some companies are going, we have an I&D department or an IED department. And I think that as I thought about and listening to Darnell, there's 3 elements to this. It's the program, it's the products, and it's the people first. It's the products, and then it's the programs. And what do I mean by that? From a people standpoint, we have to pay attention to our customers and our workforce. What are they saying? What are they feeling? Can they show up to be their authentic selves, right? Even as customers in the community, are we good corporate citizens to that community, to our customers? The second piece, when I think about the products, right? Okay, you lay out all these products, but again, going back to inclusion, have we put in the product what the customer wants, needs? Have we put the customer at the center of this? Do they understand how we will use this mobility product in the future, how they will house this mobility product in the future? Have we built the infrastructure that supports their needs as a customer first, not our needs as a corporation? And then you start to build the programs around this to bring the awareness, the training, the access to understand how to be successful in this, what I'll call e-mobility ecosystem, right? Which involves a lot of different players, but we have to be very conscious when it comes to the people, the products, and the programs to make sure that we've invested in all 3. And I think the biggest indicator for any corporation is, where have you placed your investments? Because we have a lot of people today, right now, who will say, we're talking a little bit too much about DEI, right? But you never hear that when we talk about quality, safety, profitability, innovation. You don't hear, we're talking too much about that. But as soon as you start talking about DEI, oh, wait a minute, I think we're too focused on that. Well, what does that mean? And that, by definition right there, I mean, that shows you how far we have to go when it comes to our behaviors.
Reggie, thank you so much. There's a question that's popping up too related to DEI work. And I think both you, Darnell, and Reggie have brought a very, very deep interpretation of how those three words are not interchangeable, that they're actually strategic, and some have to come before others, you know, especially in implementation. But we have a question that's really about, many companies are just in this awareness phase, and we want to know, how do you shift sort of the DEI conversation away from just awareness to the implementations, the profit margins, the talent acquisition, all of the things that are required for successful companies to thrive? And I don't know, Danielle, if you have any thoughts
I
on
do
this.
want to chime in on a couple things. There are power in words, and I absolutely agree with you, gentlemen, in stating that that inclusion, if you do certain things right and certain words lead to others, you know, it's that if then statements. On the flip side, I also want to throw out some words such as, you know, equity and equality. Very different. A lot of the reasons why you were talking about, Reggie, and it's trendy to say DEI, it's trendy to do these things, and there are a lot of things, albeit necessary, we're in a very divisive moment in time. Especially over the past 18 months, there is the biggest equalizer on the table, which was health. This pandemic was one of the greatest equalizers because it affected so many in various walks of life in various areas across this globe. It made people stop, think, and pause. So when you stop, think, and pause, and you start hearing things, yeah, it's a need for a lot to still continue. It wouldn't be equal. Or excuse me, there wouldn't be a level of equality if you didn't. If I gave you $100 and you paid me and someone else paid me in pennies, it's going to take a long time for me to stack a bunch of pennies to get to $100 if I just hand you $100 bill. And that's how I feel at times within the space. There is not equity at all. And let's be frank and clear. And if it were, would we even be having this conference or the need to have these dialogues and conversations? No, I don't think we would. With that being said, I'm very happy that the spaces are open for us. Taking full advantage of the opportunities of this DE&I. If it makes someone to open their ears, and another few words that I'd want to put out there is respect and tolerance. If I walk in the room looking like I look and having the conversation, I know Darnell, you mentioned too, people don't want to hear the words that are coming out of my mouth if they don't even want to entertain looking at me. Whether it's my melanin or hue, or they just don't like people with glasses and curly hair, whatever it is, having a level of conversation and talking about resources and education, the optics matter even to someone who does not want to talk to someone who looks like me. So in various parts of the country, when we're having these conversations and town halls and etc., there is a challenge to have a level of education when there is no respect, which I'm fine with. People say, oh, you have to respect is earned. Yeah, it is. But I just need you to tolerate me. Have a level of civility. Even if you do not care for me, whether it's me, Danielle, who is black with curly hair and glasses, or if it's me, Danielle, who is a woman and identifies with she, her, hers, whatever it is, let's have a level of civility. How can we do that and still educate? And I think we absolutely can, and still be effective. So the conversation is necessary. And for those, as far as awareness, the dialogue is necessary, and holding people's feet to the fire and having those uncomfortable conversations, I think are needed to be had and should be continued to be had. And yes, though after awareness within corporate America, diversity and inclusion leads to benefits. And there are big economic benefits if you do all of those things right, for the simple fact that it's efficient. I'm a firm believer in a Kaizen theory, meaning there is efficient ways and systems. There's that straight line. So if we're building a table together and one has a screwdriver and one has a wrench and one has a nail and the other has lumber and materials, why don't we talk to each other? Why don't I ask the person with the screwdriver, you're the expert in that area, you do that. And the person with the nail and the hammer, you do that. Or how do you hammer a nail into the table for it to be effective? Why wouldn't I ask that question? And those things aren't happening. So if you do all of those things together, that table can be built. And then things can start to happen. So that's why I think we talked about it before. Those who are aware and are allies, ask good questions, ask those poignant questions. Don't, and again, to be blunt, don't ask me what it feels like to be Black. I can only tell you what it feels like to be me. But the data with inclusion and asking multiple people, surveying, and not even asking people questions to ask questions, asking the right questions. So when we do these transportation studies and when we do these education, it's in various forms, and the questions and the conversations are poignant. Even when someone doesn't respect me, you can tolerate me for the levels of education, truth, and equity, which will be beneficial for corporations and communities.
Love that. Another.
Yeah, for sure. And Jesse, if I could just tap into one statement. You said moving from awareness to implementation. I have one word for you: consequences. Until corporations feel the consequences of their inaction or their lack of inclusion, they won't change. Like any kid that we train up as a child in a way they should go, right? Once I teach you that there's a consequence to your inaction or a consequence to disobedience or what have you, when we disobey the market, when we don't hear the voices of this economic powerhouse known as BIPOC communities, and you get left behind in that economy, you'll wake up. Now, I'm fortunate to work for a company that has acknowledged and recognized. I mean, and you look at a holistic viewpoint, right? Whether it's our supplier diversity, our dealer diversity, our policy, our comms, our marketing efforts, there is a holistic approach to DEI. And again, that goes back to respecting people. That goes back to putting the customer at the center of everything you do. And once you recognize that I am not being a good corporate citizen because it's not just about cutting checks to certain organizations to make you feel better and get the guilt off your back, right? I mean, we have some great philanthropy, but it's how we invest in the right nonprofits, right? I mean, we've got a climate equity fund that we announced. We've got a justice and inclusion fund, but it wasn't just those two things. But what's the purpose, right? Our justice and inclusion fund is focused on health, economic empowerment, education, and as well as our policy, right? And how do we take some of these societal inequities and bridge the gaps? How do we increase representation? How do we decrease barriers? But that's putting our money where our mouth is at. Then you come on the other side and you say, okay, so as a customer, what do you expect from me? Before you buy my product, will you check me on what I've done in your community, right? Will you ask me how many diverse suppliers are a part of your supply chain? Will you ask me how many diverse dealers do you have that I can go buy an EV product from? But see, we as consumers first need to ask the questions before we go out and spend our money with corporations who have made no investments in your community.
Reggie, that's amazing. It's actually related to a question that has come up too in the Q&A. People want to know how. So with the EV, we're on an EV panel. Like, let's just say the EV industry is primarily white, and it's controlled. The decisions are controlled by a dominant group and culture. And so folks want to know, how does change begin? Is it from within, or is there a role for external players to apply pressure? And I think you spoke really well about consumers, but are there other players and entities who could be part of this inside-outside strategy?
So I want to actually touch on that briefly. Number one, I think that what Reggie said was 100% spot on, right? But the thing that I see, number one, is we have to move from being transactional to being transformative, right? Transformation starts by looking internal first. It has to be an internal facing thing before we can begin to affect what's going on externally. And so are there external partners that can be brought in? Absolutely. But first of all, there has to be an internal culture that's going to be accepting of the information that is going to be brought back. One of the things that I'm really big on is, all of these different feasibility studies that go on within our communities. But the question is, who's performing those studies, and where does the information live once the study is completed, right? We need to move from being just about feasibility and start doing some true, examinations of what's going on within these communities so that we can understand, hey, these are the folks that are present, willing, capable, and able to perform a subset of things. And these are the gaps. And how do we fill those gaps in, right? But if you're not bringing in firms that specialize in these types of equity evaluations and these equity assessments on communities that look like the communities that they're in, they're not going to ask the right questions, and we're going to continue to get the same watered down results, right? So then you bring that watered down result in to an internal group in a corporation, and they say, well, based upon this report, we don't have very much work to do. But that's because of the study that's been performed. We have to start asking the question, who are we bringing in to perform these various studies? The information has to be then entrusted with the internal leadership group that is willing to make the tough decisions, that's willing to look at themselves critically and say, we need to start being more transformative. The question that came in before this last question, and no shade or disrespect for the person who posed the question, because we're here in a learning environment. But many times we're ready to move past awareness, because awareness is the place where we become cognitive of the things that we are not doing that great and the things that we are excelling in. And let's be honest, a lot of times corporations that are, that already feel that they're doing a good job don't want to be told that they're not doing a good job. So awareness is one of those things that we do a drive-by on. But we have to really begin to be intentional about the internal, inward-facing, assessments that we're doing on our corporations and asking the tough questions. And Reggie said, GM has already kind of been through that phase, but unfortunately, the lion's share of our major corporations have not been. They have not gone through that difficult time to say we are not doing everything that we should do and everything that we could do to be more equitable. And so therefore they continue with transactional things, putting money in the community, but not asking who is the best, recipient of those funds. So now, but then when you look at, and I'll even go as far as, and I don't want to dominate this, but I'm very passionate about this, because even when we began to look at the resources that are going into communities, and I'm going to pivot for 1 second from EV, and I'm going to look at just from energy efficiency. When you look at the utilities and the energy efficiency services that are being placed back into disinvested communities, it's disproportionately represented in comparison to when you look at more affluent communities, right? And so when we began to talk about that and bring that before the utilities' attention, they immediately become offended by the fact that you're challenging what's being currently done versus what should be done. And so I think that there is a lot to be said around, okay, are there external partners? Yeah, you can bring external people in, but if the internal people who are making the decisions are not open and embracive to the things that they're going to be told, then bringing someone in from the outside does you no good. The true transformation starts internally. How do we begin to affect the internal leadership structure and begin to ask the tough questions and began to pivot off the dime and move in a more progressive and equitable direction so that we can accomplish some of these larger goals?
I quickly want to chime in, Jessica, for 1 second. The how, I absolutely agree with you, Reggie. It's internal. So it is asking the consumer, asking the questions. It is the gathering together. It is a coming up together. And how do we best do that? And I think that's with us within the minority. And I put that air quotes in very purposely, because the minority is the majority. Let's be clear. Black and brown populace. So if we come together as a collective, and again, that's why I like the EV Hybrid Noir, you have 3,000 plus people that you can ask a question to, and then say, hey, company X, this is what these 3,000 people say and are in agreement to. And let's sign a coalition and let's talk to the city council person, the Congress, the Senate. This is what we do. Let's put policy in place. And that holds people's feet to the fire. So why do I need to wait till 2040 so I can breathe better? I can't breathe now, literally and figuratively, with a lot of things that are going on. What can we do today? Because my tomorrow may not be promised in a lot of communities. So it's just gathering together and asking the right questions to the right people. So Darnell, you made a great point. Why bring out other external companies or people to do things that we within our community, or we within the Evie community or Black and Brown community, can ask the right questions? So you can say, oh, the rezoning and districting is great, and just because the trucks come down this corridor, it's fine, nobody cares. Well, you had your 2 town hall meetings and open houses on Wednesday night. There are 15 churches in this small community of 5,000, and you asked 5 people, and 5 people said yes. Well, yeah, the percentages are right. Again, equality and equity. No, why did you have it on a Wednesday night? If anyone is of faith within a community, grandma, big mom, mother of the church, and deacon so-and-so is at Bible study. So optics absolutely matter. So doing the right thing for the right reasons can get positive change. So as I mentioned early, when we first started, civil rights and human rights run parallel to transportation. Should we go back in the 60s and early 70s, we're talking about bus boycotts, economic change. There was a coming together before Facebook, before I was alive, before Twitter. People came together to just try to get to work. And these are the same diesel and gas vehicles at the time that had even more CO2 emissions in the air. But the priority was, I need to make amends for my family. I need to get to work. So what can we do? Let's all walk. Let's come together. Let's ask the questions to invoke change. And then policy started to put in play. We can do this at an even more accelerated rate if there is a coming together, asking of the right questions, and holding people's feet to the fire. And that can implement change more quickly on a grassroots level, up on a basically, I say a climb up versus a trickle down. I can't wait till 2040. I may need to do other things at that point. If I were to wait for change, it will never come.
And Danielle, we have 4 more minutes left, and I want to give each of you a minute to provide a closing comment. There is a question that we didn't get to, which was, maybe one piece of advice that you think from a game-changing perspective could shift equity from a talking point into an actual implementation and action. And so as you guys think about that and noodle on what you're going to say, I just want to thank everyone for coming to the panel today. And again, thank our esteemed panelists for this incredibly valuable and important conversation. It's critical right now as we are looking at combating climate change, but also building a green economy that's inclusive for all. We have a bipartisan infrastructure bill that just got put into law. We're looking for a vote later this week on Build Back Better. And so these might be billions of dollars of investments in our communities that could really unlock and create potential for the communities that we come from, and are able to help really advance, a critical civil rights issue around racial justice, even gender justice, climate justice, and make us more globally competitive. So I'd love to just pivot this to maybe Reggie, if you could just start off with closing us out. What is that one thing that, this panel should really take away?
If we're going to drive true DEI, it comes down to customers, competition, compliance, and culture. And you wrap that all up in consequences. If you understand your customer and you listen to them, if you understand the competition and where they're going and where you not got to get ahead of them, if you understand the compliance will drive a difference in behaviors, and then you wrap that up in culture, which is our actual intentional and deliberate actions, then you'll have good consequences. Consequences as a word doesn't have to be bad. Make your dollars count. Invest, buy from the companies who have your back.
Amazing. Danielle?
Don't be afraid to build a table while you're waiting for the seat. Implementation can happen right away. Evie Noir and Evie Hybrid Noir are prime examples of that level of not waiting. A co-founder, Dr. Shelley Francis and Terry Travis, are amazing because they took a vision and a passion and had a coming together. And we're here at a 2-day conference to further the agendas and policy of equity. So day one starts at day one at various levels. And again, it's okay to be confrontational. I agree with you, Reggie, but being ready, not only with questions if you don't know, and ready to implement change, and having a coming together, your resource tools, a plan, a level of policy, and ready to enact. So when that table or that chair is offered to you, you know what to do and you have a game plan and ready to go. And if it's not, that table over here that you built will eventually become a village. So it starts at some point, and day one is your day one.
Thank you. And Darnell, close us out.
Well, thank you. There's a lot to be learned and to be discovered from things that have happened in our past. And I think Special Field Order number 15 is at top of mind for me. Special Field Order number 15 was what we know as 40 acres and a mule, where General Sherman went, after the Emancipation Proclamation, he wanted to give land to all of the freed slaves. And he went but the way that he went about it was he spoke to all of the Black pastors of that day, because he recognized them as being the leaders, he recognized them as being the influencers, and he recognized them as being the portal to the broader community of folks that would be impacted by those decisions. And I think that we could take a lot away from that, an understanding that when we want to impact communities in a sustainable way, we need to identify who the leaders are, who the gatekeepers are, where the portals to gain access to those folks and those communities that we want to ultimately impact. Ultimately, understanding as a last thought is that the folks that are closest to the problem are also closest to the solutions.
Thank you. And thank you, everyone. And please enjoy the rest of your conference.